Bible Show.
A cradle of one voice, where words were like water. Close your eyes for a moment, friends, not to sleep, but to travel. Journey back with me, millennia upon millennia, to a place where human history truly began to coil and spring. Ancient Mesopotamia. The very words feel heavy with age, don't they? Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. And oh, what rivers! The mighty Tigris and Euphrates, lifeblood of a nascent world. Their waters didn't just quench thirst. They birthed civilization itself from the fertile silt deposited like a gift upon their banks. Imagine the air, thick, warm, carrying the damp scent of reeds, the rich odor of wet earth, the distant tang of wood smoke. See the landscape? Not barren desert, but a vast, green-gold plain. Shinar, they called it. Fields of barley rippled like a golden sea under a sky so vast and blue, it felt like a dome pressed down upon the earth. Canals, marvels of early engineering, cut precise lines through the fields, carrying precious water from the rivers to feed the thirsty crops. This was the cradle, the nursery, and nestled within it, pulsing with a vibrant, almost frightening energy, was the city. Babylon, not yet the legendary metropolis of Nebuchadnezzar, but already a place of power, ambition, and astonishing unity. Walk its streets in your mind, not paved with gold, but hard-packed earth, churned by countless sandaled feet. Buildings of sun-dried mud brick rose around you, homes, workshops, storehouses. The air vibrated with sound, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of looms weaving wool, the sharp clink of copper being shaped by skilled smiths, the lowing of oxen hauling heavy loads, the cries of merchants hawking dates, grain, pottery, and shiny bits of imported lapis lazuli. But above it all, binding this chaotic symphony into harmony, was one sound, one language. Imagine it, a single flowing river of words, understood by every soul within the city walls and far beyond in the surrounding villages. Not a dialect here, an accent there. Truly, profoundly, one tongue. A mother, kneeling by a simple hearth, sings a lullaby to her fretful child. The words, soft, rhythmic, comforting, drift out the window. A potter shaping clay in the courtyard next door hears it, smiles faintly, understanding the melody and the meaning instantly. The language connects them across walls. A foreman overseeing the repair of a canal bank barks an order. More reeds for the bund. Pack them tighter on the north side. His voice cuts through the din. Dozens of laborers, sweating in the sun, hear him. Not one hesitates. Not one asks for clarification. They move as one, understanding the command perfectly, their shared language making them an extension of the foreman's will. Two old men sit in the shade of a palm tree, arguing passionately about the best way to trap fish in the reeds. Their voices rise and fall, gestures flying, but there's no confusion, only the lively flow of debate. They understand each nuance, each subtle implication. This wasn't just convenience, dear viewers. This was profound, world-shaping power. This shared language forged them into one people. It dissolved barriers. Ambitions could be shared instantly. Plans could be coordinated with breathtaking efficiency. Grief, joy, warning, command all flowed seamlessly. They weren't just individuals living near each other. They were a single organism, a collective mind and muscle. Their unity was their strength, their identity, the very air they breathed. It felt ... eternal, unbreakable, invincible. But history whispers a warning, doesn't it? Could such perfect harmony last? Could such concentrated, unchecked human power truly remain unchallenged, even by the heavens themselves? That unity, that beautiful, potent river of shared understanding, was it a blessing, or was it a gathering storm? We return to Babylon, friends, to the city pulsing with that single, powerful voice. But every city needs a heart, a will, a driving force. And in Babylon, that force had a name, Nimrod. Picture him. Not just a king, but a legend walking the earth. Grandson of Ham, son of Cush, his lineage whispered of ancient strength. Texts would later call him a mighty hunter before the Lord. Not just of beasts, you understand, but of destiny, of power. Imagine a presence that filled a room, a voice that commanded silence not through shouting, but through sheer, magnetic intensity. His shoulders were broad, forged by the hunt and the weight of rule. His eyes, dark and sharp, missed nothing, the yield of the barley fields, the strength of a brick wall, the flicker of doubt in a subordinate's gaze. He stood now, not amidst the crowd, but above it, on a high balcony of his palace, a structure already grander than any other in Shinar. Below him, Babylon unfolded like a living tapestry, woven by 1,000 hands speaking one tongue. He saw the strength of it, the coordinated dance of laborers raising granaries, the swift, unerring relay of messages shouted from street to street, the seamless flow of grain from barge to storehouse, managed by voices understanding each other perfectly. This unity was his greatest treasure, his most potent weapon. It was Babylon's power. It was his power. A deep satisfaction warmed him, the satisfaction of a builder surveying a foundation laid true and strong. But then his gaze lifted, past the smoke curling from 100 hearths, past the wheeling hawks, mere specks against the impossible vastness, up, towards the heavens, that endless, untouchable blue, that silent, watchful dome separating the realm of mortals from the realm of, what? The gods? The divine? The unknown? A restlessness stirred within Nimrod, a cold ember fanned by the warm breeze of his people's capability. It began innocently enough, perhaps, a practical thought. We are strong here, on the earth. We have built this. But the earth is vulnerable. Remember the Tales, the great waters that covered all? What if they return? A flicker of ancestral fear, deep and primal. Then the thought evolved, twisting like a vine seeking sunlight. Why should we be bound only to the dust? Why should heaven remain distant, untouchable, the sole domain of forces we cannot comprehend or control? We have mastered the river. We have mastered the clay. We have mastered the word that binds us. Can we not reach higher? And then it crystallized, sharp and audacious, striking his mind like a bolt of copper in the sun. The tower, not just a tower, the tower, a structure so colossal, so unprecedented, that its summit would pierce the very vault of the sky. A monument not just of safety, but of glory. A declaration etched in brick and bitumen against the face of eternity. "Let us build a tower," the vision whispered, taking root in his soul. "A tower whose top will be in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves." Ah, there it was, the pivot. The subtle, insidious shift. Did he even notice it happening? The desire for safety was still there, a practical concern. But it was quickly overshadowed, consumed, by the sheer, intoxicating ambition of the act itself. Let us make a name for ourselves, not for the gods who might dwell above, not for the ancestors who came before, for them, for humanity, for Nimrod. This tower wouldn't be a bridge seeking connection with the divine. It would be a challenge, a fist of mud and ambition raised in defiance. Look upon our works, see what we have wrought. We are not mere creatures of the dust. We are builders of mountains. We touch your domain. Our name, my name, will echo here in the place you call your own. Pride. It wasn't a shout yet, not a bellowed boast. It was a whisper, a cold, clear whisper that coiled around his heart as he stood on that balcony, the sun warming his skin, but something colder taking hold within. It whispered of invincibility. It whispered that their unity, their strength, their will was the ultimate power. It whispered that the heavens were not a realm of awe, but a frontier to be conquered. He turned from the view, his mind ablaze. The unified hum of Babylon below was no longer just the sound of his city. It was the fuel for his audacious dream. He summoned his advisors, his architects, his chief priests. His voice, when he spoke of the tower, wasn't questioning. It was commanding. It carried the weight of his vision, infused with that newly awakened pride. He spoke of reaching the heavens, of securing their legacy, of making a name that would never fade. Can you feel it, viewers? That chilling moment when noble ambition curdles into something darker? When the desire to build for security transforms into the drive to build against the very order of creation. The whisper of pride had entered the heart of Shinar, and it spoke with the voice of a king. Babylon's next great project wasn't just about bricks and height. It was about to become a monument to the most dangerous force humanity possesses, the belief that we are the ultimate masters of our fate, needing no wisdom beyond our own. The ground trembles, laying the foundation of arrogance, where dreams became ditches and dust. Nimrod's vision, once a whisper in his own soul, had become a fire raging through Babylon. The idea of the tower, no longer just an idea, but a command, electrified the one people. It wasn't merely a project. It was a destiny, a shared obsession that bound them tighter than ever before. Architects, their minds dizzy with the scale of the king's demand, had translated audacity into lines drawn on papyrus and etched onto clay tablets. Not just a tall structure, but a ziggurat, a stepped mountain of human creation, a stairway ascending defiantly towards the unreachable blue. Its base alone was designed to swallow acres. Now, on this chosen day, under a sky that seemed paradoxically larger and more indifferent than ever, they stood on the threshold. The air crackled, not with storm, but with the static of concentrated human will. Thousands had gathered, not just laborers, but the entire city drawn to witness the birth of their monument. Priests chanted invocations, but the gods they called upon felt distant, overshadowed by the sheer earthbound ambition radiating from Nimrod and the throng. The scent of crushed thyme and tamarisk, scattered for the ceremony, was quickly overwhelmed by the smell of sweat and sun-baked dust. Nimrod raised his hand. Silence fell, profound and heavy. Not the comfortable silence of shared understanding, but the breath-held silence before a plunge. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it carried like a hammer blow across the plain. "Begin!" The word hung in the air. Then chaos erupted, but a coordinated chaos, a terrifying testament to their unity. Not the sound of construction, not yet. The first sound was the brutal, rhythmic thud of hundreds of bronze-tipped digging sticks striking the unyielding earth. Chunk, chunk, a percussive heartbeat of ambition. Then the scrape of shovels broad, wooden blades biting into the loosened soil. Scrape, thump, the sound of dirt hitting woven reed baskets. Scrape, thump. Imagine the sheer visceral scale of it, viewers. Thousands of hands, thousands of muscles straining. Lines of men stripped to loincloths, their backs already gleaming with sweat under the fierce Mesopotamian sun, moved with the terrifying synchronicity of ants. Pickmen shattered the crust. Shovelmen scooped. Basket carriers, men, women, even older children, hoisted the heavy loads onto shoulders already reddening, trudging to the growing mounds of displaced earth that began to ring the sight like the ramparts of a conquered land. The air filled with a symphony of exertion. Grunts, shouted encouragements instantly understood. Faster on the south line. Deeper here. The rhythmic panting of effort, the constant, dry rasp of earth moving. This wasn't just digging a hole. This was sculpting the earth's defiance. They were gouging out the foundation pit. And what a pit! It had to be. This tower wasn't just tall. It was monstrously wide at its base, designed to support impossible weight. The surveyor's ropes marked a chasm to be. Teams dug down, deeper than any building's foundation Babylon had ever known. 10 cubits? 20? The sides became sheer walls of exposed, stratified earth. Ancient layers of silt and clay suddenly exposed to the sun after millennia of darkness. The pit became a wound in the plain, a raw gash of ambition. Can you feel it? The trembling wasn't literal, perhaps not an earthquake, but there was a vibration in the air, a thrumming passed from straining muscle to packed earth and back again. It was the trembling of effort on an unimaginable scale. It was the trembling of the earth itself, yielding reluctantly to this concentrated assault. And deeper still, was it the trembling of something else? A premonition? A divine unease echoing through the very ground they sought to conquer? Down in the deepening pit, the world narrowed. Sunlight became a glaring rectangle high above. The air grew thick and hot, smelling overwhelmingly of damp clay, crushed roots, and human sweat. Water carriers constantly poured precious liquid onto the workers' heads and backs, creating rivulets of mud on straining skin. Foremen moved constantly along the edges, their voices hoarse but clear, directing the flow, ensuring the sides remained sheer, the bottom level. The precision was terrifying. This foundation wasn't just functional. It was the first statement of their intent. It had to be perfect, flawless, a declaration carved into the bedrock. This is where we begin our ascent. This is where we anchor our challenge to the sky. Nimrod watched, not from a shaded canopy, but from the very edge of the pit. Dust coated his sandals, his kilt. He felt the vibrations through the soles of his feet. He saw the mountain of earth growing outside the pit's perimeter, the physical manifestation of their displaced humility. His eyes held no doubt, only a fierce, burning satisfaction. Each basket of dirt removed, each inch of depth achieved, was a victory, a step closer to the heavens, a step further from the dust. The arrogance wasn't just in the dream. It was here, in the relentless, coordinated mastery over the very ground they stood on. They weren't asking permission. They were taking. Finally, after days, perhaps weeks, of brutal labor, they hit it. Not water, not rock, but a layer of such dense, compacted clay and gravel that the digging sticks rang out with a dull clang. The chief architect, his face etched with exhaustion and triumph, approached Nimrod at the pit's edge. His voice, though weary, carried the news. The foundation level is reached and prepared, great king. It is solid. It is ready. A cheer rose, ragged but powerful, echoing up from the depths of the pit and rolling across the plain. Sweat-streaked faces looked up, seeking Nimrod's approval. He raised his hand again, not for silence this time, but in acknowledgement. A grim smile touched his lips. Then came the foundation stone. Not a small ceremonial rock, but a massive quarried slab, dragged from distant hills by teams of oxen straining against ropes thicker than a man's arm. It took 100 men, ropes, and wooden rollers to maneuver it to the very center of the vast pit. Priests anointed it with precious oils, chanting louder now, but their voices felt small against the sheer physicality of the stone and the watching, sweating multitude. Nimrod himself stepped forward. He didn't kneel. He placed his hand upon the cold, unyielding surface of the stone, not in prayer, in claiming. Here, his gesture seemed to scream to the heavens. Upon this stone, we build our defiance. Upon this stone, we anchor our name. The stone was lowered. A mighty thud echoed, not just through the pit, but seemingly through the earth itself. It settled into the carefully prepared bed. The foundation was laid, not just of brick and mortar, but of pride compacted harder than the stone itself. The dream was no longer air. It was earth. And the true weight of their ambition was only just beginning to press down. The foundation stone lay embedded, a dark, silent heart in the geometric wound they had carved from the plain. But stone, precious and scarce in the river-silt lands of Shinar, could not build a mountain. Ambition needed a different currency, and the great rivers, the very givers of life to Shinar, provided it. Mud. Not just any mud. The rich, deep alluvial clay deposited over millennia by the Tigris and Euphrates. It was thick, plastic, heavy, the perfect raw material for an assault on the heavens. But raw clay cracks in the sun, crumbles under weight. It needed transformation. It needed the river's gifts and the kiln's fire. Shift your gaze now, dear viewers, away from the pit's solemn depth, down to the vibrant, messy, vital world along the Euphrates banks. Here, the true scale of Babylon's obsession became breathtakingly clear. This wasn't a brick-making operation. It was a mud metropolis, a sprawling factory dedicated to turning earth into ambition. The clay pits. Imagine vast, open wounds in the riverside flats. Teams of laborers, men and women, stood knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep, in thick, sucking gray ooze. The smell here was primal. Wet earth, decaying reeds, stagnant water, and the sharp tang of human sweat. Using broad-bladed wooden spades and their own bare hands, they scooped great glistening masses of clay from the pits. It was back-breaking, relentless work. The mud clung, heavy and cold, dragging at limbs. Water carriers moved constantly, pouring river water into the pits and over the workers, turning the raw clay into a malleable slurry. The air rang with the wet slurp of spades, the grunts of effort, and the constant shouted coordination. Deeper here. Bring water to the north pit. Mind the edge, it's soft. Perfect understanding made this dangerous, messy workflow with terrifying efficiency. The tempering yards. The hauled clay wasn't ready yet. It needed temper. Cartloads of chopped straw, the golden, sun-bleached stalks left from the recent barley harvest, were brought in from the fields beyond the city. Workers, often children and elders, tirelessly forked mountains of this straw into the waiting clay pits. Then began the mixing. This wasn't gentle stirring. Teams of laborers, sometimes yoked together like oxen, trudged in endless circles through the thick slurry, churning it with their feet, driving the straw deep into the clay's matrix. Squelch, squelch. The rhythmic, wet sound was constant. The straw wasn't just binder. It was reinforcement, preventing the bricks from shrinking and cracking catastrophically as they dried and fired. It was the skeleton within the mud flesh. The mixture became a thick, fibrous sludge, the color of wet ash. The molding. Now came the shaping of ambition. The tempered clay was hauled in dripping baskets to long, open sheds or simply shaded areas on higher ground. Here, rows of wooden molds awaited, simple rectangular frames, open at the top and bottom. Molder after molder stood at their stations. With practiced, swift movements honed by unity and shared purpose, they scooped great handfuls of the cold, sticky slurry and slammed it into the molds, overfilling them. Then, with a wet thwack, they brought down a wooden trowel or simply their hands, scraping off the excess with a decisive stroke. A quick jerk lifted the mold, leaving behind a perfect, glistening rectangle of wet clay, a mud brick. The motion was repeated endlessly. Scoop, slam, scrape, lift. Scoop, slam, scrape, lift. It was hypnotic, a relentless production line fueled by the single, driving dream of the tower. Workers moved between the mixing pits and the molding stations in an unending stream, baskets swaying on shoulders, the wet clay leaving slick, dark trails on the packed earth. The drying fields, the newly formed bricks, heavy and fragile, were carefully lifted onto flat, woven reed mats or simply onto cleared, leveled ground, the drying fields. These stretched for acres, a geometric patchwork of damp rectangles laid out in precise rows under the blazing Mesopotamian sun. Workers moved among them like gardeners tending strange, gray crops, constantly turning the bricks to ensure even drying, protecting them from sudden rain with hastily thrown reed covers. The air here smelled of damp earth slowly yielding to heat. As the days passed, the bricks lightened in color, from deep gray to a pale, dusty buff, shrinking slightly as the water fled. They hardened, but were still vulnerable. They were sun-dried bricks, the backbone of Babylon, destined for the tower's massive hidden core. The kilns where mud met destiny, but for the tower's glory, for its skin, its visible defiance, mere sun-drying wasn't enough. They needed permanence. They needed fire. Enter the kilns. These weren't simple ovens. They were behemoths. Constructed of fire brick themselves, they rose like squat, angry ziggurats near the river, close to the fuel sources. Shaped like giant, upside-down pots or long, dragon-like tunnels, their gaping, loading mouths breathed heat even before firing. The fuel? Bundles of reeds harvested from the marshes, precious wood, and crucially, bitumen-soaked timber and reeds, the same black tar that would later bind the bricks, providing intense, sustained heat. Teams of kill tenders, the bravest or perhaps the most desperate, worked here. Their bodies, coated in ash and soot, gleamed with sweat that evaporated instantly in the radiating heat. Their world was a haze of heat shimmer, the roar of flames, and the choking smell of burning reeds and boiling tar. Loading, brick carriers moving in relay teams that stretched back to the drying fields, brought the pale, sun-dried bricks. Kill workers, using long, fire-proofed poles, carefully stacked them inside the kiln's cavernous belly, leaving channels for the searing air to circulate. Precision was life here. A poorly stacked kill collapse or bake unevenly. Firing. Once loaded, the massive doors were sealed with mud and brick. Then the inferno began. Tenders fed the hungry fireboxes, shoveling in reeds and bitumen-soaked fuel. The roar intensified. Flames, visible through small vents, licked a furious orange. The kiln's exterior became too hot to approach closely. The firing could last for days, the temperature carefully controlled by the tender's experience and intuition, passed instantly through their shared language. They watched the vent colors, from black smoke to clear heat shimmer, knowing the exact moment the transformation was complete. Unloading and the birth of stone. When the fires died and the kill cooled enough to approach. The sealed doors were broken open. Workers, faces wrapped against the residual heat and dust, ventured inside. What emerged were no longer mere mud bricks. They were fired bricks, hard as stone, ringing with a clear clink when struck, ranging in color from deep, burnt orange to rich terracotta red. They were beautiful, durable, and heavy. These were the glory bricks, destined for the tower's outer skin, its staircases, its pinnacle, the visible face of their ambition. Carriers, muscles straining under the new weight, hauled them out, stacking them carefully outside the kilns, ready for their journey to the rising mountain. Nimrod walked among them, not just by the kilns, but through the entire sprawling mud metropolis. He felt the cool suck of the clay pits near the river, smelled the earthy damp of the drying fields, winced at the blast furnace heat radiating from the roaring kilns. He saw the unity, the unbroken chain from river ooze to ringing, rock-hard brick. He saw the cost, the blistered hands of the molders, the ash-caked faces of the kill tenders, the permanent stoop of the clay haulers. But he also saw the power, the relentless, coordinated transformation of the humble earth beneath their feet into the building blocks of heaven. Each brick, sun-dried or fired, was a testament to their will, a tiny, perfect unit of their shared audacity. The mountain they would build wasn't just reaching for the sky. It was forged from the very essence of Shinar, baptized in the river and tempered in the kiln's hellish fire. The kiln's fire wasn't just baking clay. It was forging their pride into something hard, enduring, and dangerously brittle.
The black blood of the earth, bitumen, and the rising terraces where ambition climbed on sticky wings. The kilns roared, vomiting fire and smoke. The drying fields baked under the sun, turning endless mud rectangles into pale, hard loaves. The riverbanks churned with the labor of wresting clay from the earth's grasp. Babylon was a city consumed by a single, monumental purpose: to feed the rising giant. But brick alone, even the beautiful ringing-fired brick destined for glory, could not bind a mountain. Mud mortar, sufficient for a house or a granary, would dissolve like sugar under the crushing weight of the tears to come. They needed something stronger, something primal, something that reeked of the earth's hidden power. They needed bitumen. Shift your senses, viewers. Away from the blinding white of drying bricks, away from the orange fury of the kilns, towards a place that felt wrong. On the outskirts of the construction frenzy, where the fertile plain gave way to cracked, barren earth, nature offered its dark sacrament. Here, the ground wept. Thick, black, viscous tar oozed from fissures like infected wounds, bubbling slowly under the relentless sun. This was bitumen, raw petroleum seepage, the black blood of the earth, the pits of perdition. Imagine shallow depressions dug around these natural seeps. The air here hung heavy, thick, and pungent. Not the clean smell of earth or fire, but a choking, sulphurous reek, like rotten eggs mixed with burning rubber and hot tar. It coated the back of your throat, made your eyes water. Workers assigned here were the damned of the project. They moved slowly, deliberately, coated in a fine sheen of black dust that clung to sweat. Their tools were long, heavy wooden paddles and broad-bladed shovels designed for the clinging muck. They stirred the bubbling pits, the tar gloop-glooping obscenely, releasing fresh waves of noxious fumes. Flies, drawn to the stench, buzzed in lazy, doomed clouds. The heat radiating from the dark surface was intense, adding to the hellish atmosphere. This wasn't clay. It was alive, viscous, hungry. It clung to shovels, to buckets, to skin, with a stubborn, sticky persistence.
The haul, retrieving the bitumen, was an ordeal. Workers dipped large, thick-walled leather buckets into the steaming pits, heaving back with all their might as the tar resisted, stretching like black taffy before finally surrendering a glutinous mass. Filled buckets, incredibly heavy and precariously balanced, were lifted onto crude wooden sledges or carried by pairs of men using poles thrust through handles. The journey to the tower site became a slow, treacherous pilgrimage. Black trails stained the earth wherever they passed. Spills were catastrophic, a sticky, burning mess that took hours and back-breaking labor to scrape up. The haulers' muscles screamed under the unnatural weight and the cloying heat. Their lungs burned with every acrid breath. Unity here wasn't about ambition. It was about shared misery and survival. Shouts were hoarse, strained, steady, left side down. Watch the edge. The mortar of defiance. At the tower base, the bitumen met its purpose. Mortar crews, perhaps the most skilled laborers, waited. They worked near roaring fires where the bitumen was carefully reheated in large clay cauldrons, making it fluid enough to spread, but not so hot it ignited. The smell intensified, a greasy, suffocating cloud that hung over the lower tiers. Using heavy, long-handled paddles dipped in water to prevent sticking, the mortarmen scooped the steaming, sticky tar. With swift, practiced movements, they slathered it thickly onto the freshly laid course of bricks. Schlup, slap, spread. The sound was thick, wet, obscene. The heat radiating from the bitumen and the sun-baked bricks below was brutal. Sweat poured down the mortarmen's bodies, cutting tracks through the black grime coating them. Blisters formed and burst on hands gripping scalding hot paddle handles. The bitumen didn't just bind the bricks, it fused them. As it cooled slightly, it set with the tenacity of geological time. This was the glue holding their arrogance together, sticky, black, and reeking of the abyss. The ascent. Now the tower truly began to rise. Tier upon massive tier climbed skyward. The lower levels, vast and stable, were built primarily with sun-dried bricks bound by rivers of bitumen. But as the structure ascended, narrowing slightly with each step, the beautiful hard-fired terracotta bricks came into their own. These formed the outer skin, the visible face of Babylon's pride. Laid with meticulous precision, their warm red-orange hue glowing against the stark black mortar lines, they created a terrifyingly beautiful geometric pattern. Terraces emerged, vast, flat platforms at each level, like steps for giants. And winding up the flanks, broad, monumental staircases began their dizzying ascent, each step a foot high, designed for procession as much as function. The perilous heights. The higher they built, the more perilous the work became. Scaffolding, a forest of lashed-together timber poles and reed-mat platforms, clung to the tower's flanks like skeletal ivy. Workers now operated hundreds of feet above the plain. The wind, a gentle breeze below, became a constant, buffeting force up here, tugging at loincloths, threatening to pluck a man from his perch. Carrying baskets of heavy-fired bricks or buckets of scalding bitumen up the steep, narrow ramps and ladders was an act of courage and endurance bordering on madness. Dizziness was a constant enemy. A misstep, a frayed rope, a gust of wind at the wrong moment. And it wasn't just a fall. It was annihilation. Shouts took on a new edge, sharp with fear that even perfect understanding couldn't soothe. Hold the line steady. Bitumen coming up. Brace against the wind. Looking down was vertigo-inducing. Babylon sprawled below like a child's intricate mud model. The Euphrates became a thin, glittering thread. People were specks. The vast plain stretched to a horizon that seemed to curve. The whisper becomes a roar. And here, on these vertiginous heights, with the wind whipping their hair and the sun beating down, a dangerous alchemy occurred. The sheer scale of what they were achieving, the dizzying height, the panoramic view of a world seemingly laid at their feet. It twisted the initial awe into something darker. That initial whisper of pride in Nimrod's heart became a roaring fire in the breasts of the laborers. A kill worker, pausing to wipe sweat and bitumen grime from his eyes, gazed not up at the remaining distance to the sky, but down at the insignificant world below. A bricklayer, securing a perfect terracotta block with a thick smear of tar, felt a surge not of devotion, but of triumph. Look! Their hearts seemed to thunder, louder than the kilns below. Look what we have built, our hands, our strength, our unity. We wrestle the very earth and fire. We conquer the wind and the height. We are not forms in the dust. We are builders of mountains. The heavens, they are not the domain of distant gods. They are the next tier. The bitumen bound the bricks. This intoxicating collective pride bound their souls. They were no longer building a refuge or a monument. They were building a throne from which humanity would declare its sovereignty over creation itself. The black blood of the earth fueled their ascent, but it was the intoxicating venom of arrogance that propelled them towards the final fatal reach. The heavens gazed down, divine disquiet, where ambition met the infinite. The Tower of Babel rose, not like a tree, slowly and organically, but like a malignancy, a jagged scar against the smooth dome of the sky. Tier upon tier it climbed, a ziggurat of terrifying ambition. Its base, wider than many hillsides, was a monument to sheer mass, millions of sun-dried bricks fused by rivers of stinking bitumen. Higher up, the beautiful, precise courses of fired terracotta brick glowed with a warm, defiant fire in the sunlight, each black mortar line a stark reminder of the dark glue holding human pride together. Scaffolding clung to its sides like barnacles on a leviathan. From this impossible height, the wind no longer whispered. It howled, snatching at the shouts of workers who seemed like ants clinging to a mountain of their own making. Down in Babylon, Nimrod walked the completed lower terraces. His shadow stretched long and imposing. He felt the solid, unyielding stone brick beneath his sandals. He looked down, not across, not up, but down, upon his city, his kingdom, the sprawling plain of Shinar. The Euphrates was a mere thread of silver. People were indistinguishable dots. A profound sense of dominion, cold and intoxicating, flooded him. His will, his vision, their power. It was palpable, thick in the air like bitumen fumes. The unified shouts from below, the perfectly coordinated movements of brick carriers and mortarmen hundreds of feet up the scaffolding. It was the sound of limitless potential. Nothing, the thought echoed in his core, is beyond us. But the heavens are vast, dear viewers, immeasurably vast, and they perceive differently. The presence observing, call it the divine, the infinite, the source, as the ancient texts recount, gazed not upon the engineering marvel, but upon the spirit that fueled it. This was no act of devotion, no humble seeking of connection. This was a fist of mud and fire and arrogance, thrust defiantly upwards. The unified will, the single language, the terrifying efficiency. It wasn't harmony. It was a weapon pointed at the very order of creation. The observation wasn't anger, not jealousy. It was a profound, sorrowful recognition. The ancient narrative describes it thus: and the divine descended to perceive the city and the tower which the humans had built. Imagine that gaze. Not a physical descent, but an intensification of awareness, a focusing of infinite consciousness upon this single, audacious point of concentrated human ego. What was seen? The unity. Behold, the people are one. The seamless flow of command and execution, the instantaneous understanding, the collective muscle moving as a single entity. It was awe-inspiring, truly. A force of nature harnessed by mind and will, the language. And they all have one language, ... That single flowing river of words binding them, enabling plans of staggering complexity to be conceived and executed without friction. It was the key to their power, the unchecked potential. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. This was the chilling realization. The tower wasn't the culmination. It was the terrifying proof of concept. If they could this with mud and tar and will, what couldn't they do? Conquer death? Remake the very fabric of life? Declare war upon the heavens themselves? Their ambition, fueled by pride and unmoored from any sense of reverence or limitation, was a runaway fire. Now nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. The danger wasn't the tower's height. The danger was the unlimited trajectory of a humanity united solely by its own self-worship, believing itself accountable to nothing but its own desires. They sought to prevent scattering by their own might. Their actions made a different kind of scattering, a necessary diversification, inevitable. Their unity, devoid of humility, was a monolith destined to crush itself and everything around it under the weight of its own hubris. The observation concluded not with a sentence, but with a profound understanding. The intervention wouldn't be destruction, not fire from heaven, not an earthquake shattering the bricks. That would only feed their narrative of defiance, martyr their arrogance. No, the intervention would be subtle, profound. It would strike not at their bodies, nor even directly at their creation, but at the very source of their terrifying power, their unity of mind and tongue. It would be an act not of annihilation, but of preservation, preserving humanity from itself. The gaze lingered for a moment longer on the bustling ants below, on the proud king surveying his domain from his man-made mountain, on the reeking bitumen pits and roaring kilns. The hum of their single voice, once a symbol of potential, now sounded like the ominous drone of a gathering storm. The disquiet in the heavens solidified into resolve. The time for observation was over. A time for introducing the beautiful, necessary complexity of diversity had come. The perfect unity of Babel was about to meet the creative force of dissolution. Eli looked up, squinting against the sun. He saw Amar's gesture, heard the sounds leaving Amar's mouth, and his face contorted in pure, uncomprehending bewilderment. The sounds, they were wrong, harsh, guttural, alien, like rocks grinding together, like the cough of a sick jackal. They held no meaning, no familiar shape. Eli's brow furrowed deep, his eyes wide with dawning panic. What was Amar saying? Was he hurt? Angry? The command was gone, replaced by terrifying noise. Quid dicis? Non intellego. Eli shouted back instinctively. What are you saying? I don't understand. But the words that erupted from Eli's mouth were a rapid, melodic stream, full of trills and soft vowels, utterly alien to Amar. To Amar, it sounded like birdsong, beautiful but meaningless babble. The world tilted. Amar stared. Eli stared back. A chasm opened between them, wider and deeper than the foundation bit. The wind, howling a moment before, seemed to hold its breath. The tower site erupted, not in productive chaos, but in pure, primal pandemonium. The beautiful symphony of unified labor shattered into 1,000 dissonant shards. Commands became noise. Foremen shouted, their faces purple with frustration, but their words were met only by blank stares, fearful flinches, or angry retorts in equally incomprehensible tongues. The seamless flow of materials stopped dead. Brick carriers milled in confusion. Mortar crews stood idle, their paddles dripping useless tar. Fear became isolation. Workers who had labored side by side for years, sharing jokes, sharing burdens, sharing purpose, suddenly found themselves surrounded by shouting phantoms. The person next to you wasn't a brother in arms. They were a terrifying stranger screaming gibberish. Eyes darted, wide with panic, searching desperately for anyone whose sounds resembled the familiar cadence of home. Families clung together, terrified of being separated in this sudden, terrifying linguistic wilderness. Frustration became violence. Misunderstandings fueled by fear, and the inability to explain flared into shoving matches, thrown clods of earth, and the crash of dropped tools. A man gestured angrily for a rope. The other saw a threat and swung a brick mold. The black blood of the earth seemed to seep into their interactions. Purpose became despair. The half-finished tower, once a symbol of their invincible unity, now loomed over them like a monstrous tombstone for their shattered dream. Workers dropped their tools, trowels, paddles, baskets, right where they stood. They abandoned buckets of precious bitumen, leaving them to harden and crack in the sun. Kill tenders, realizing no one understood their warnings, simply backed away from the roaring furnaces, leaving them to burn uncontrolled or slowly cool. The relentless hum of Babel was replaced by a terrifying cacophony, a roaring sea of mutually hostile, utterly incomprehensible noises. The word Babel itself would forever echo this sound, the sound of confusion. Nimrod felt it before he fully comprehended it. The rhythm below faltered. The unified shout that was the heartbeat of his ambition stuttered, then ceased, replaced by a rising tide of discordant sound, shouts, screams, cries that held no meaning, only raw emotion. He strode to the parapet, his face a mask of fury. Below, instead of the ordered machine, he saw chaos. Workers running in random directions, arguments breaking out, tools abandoned, silence. He bellowed, his voice accustomed to instant obedience. Back to work. You hear me? Back to your posts. But the words that left his mouth were a jumble of guttural snarls and sharp, unfamiliar consonants. Grake Thul, Marn Kazoth, Shathyar. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Workers below looked up. They saw their king, his face contorted with rage, shouting down at them. But the sounds, they were monstrous, demonic, utterly alien, not a command, but a curse. A wave of pure terror washed over the crowd. Some fell to their knees, covering their ears. Others screamed and fled blindly. Nimrod's power, built entirely on the bedrock of understood command, evaporated in an instant. He was just another man shouting nonsense into the wind. His fist slammed against the parapet, the fired brick unyielding. He was impotent. His dream, his name, his challenge to heaven, lay crumbling not in brick and bitumen, but in the terrifying silence between meaningless sounds. The whisper of pride had been answered by the roar of confusion. End of Part 1. The Ascent and the Shattering.